The world's smallest dog, a mere 4 ounces of trembling fur, sent the renowned vet into a panic as he fumbled with his instruments. Within hours, Max would discover that this tiny creature carried a genetic secret capable of curing diseases that had plagued humanity for decades. As family ties unraveled and betrayal lurked behind every corner, the truth of his lineage would threaten to shatter everything he held dear. Just as hope flickered dimly, the revelation of this dog's DNA would ignite a fierce battle for control over a legacy that could change medicine forever. My name is Max. I never imagined a little dog could turn my life upside down. With the tiny dog nestled in my arms, I felt an odd mix of exhilaration and fear. The pup, no bigger than my hand, looked up at me with big, round eyes that sparkled with a curious blend of mischief and vulnerability. I could hardly believe my luck. This little creature seemed like a dream come true. But as I gazed down at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was going to stir up more than just excitement in our family. When I reached home, the air felt thick with tension. My parents were in the kitchen, their voices rising and falling like a tide. It was usually a warm, inviting space filled with laughter and the smell of my mother's famous cookies, but today it felt heavy. I cautiously entered, cradling the tiny dog against my chest. As soon as my mother spotted us, her expression softened, and for a moment, the argument faded into the background. "Oh, Max, what do you have there?" she asked, her voice brightening as she stepped closer, reaching out to stroke the dog's silky fur. I couldn't help but smile, watching the way her face lit up. It was a brief, shining moment, but just as quickly, I noticed her eyes flicker with concern as she took in the size of the pup. "Mom, I found him abandoned in the park," I explained, my voice filled with a mix of pride and urgency. "He's so small. And I think he needs us." The dog whimpered slightly, almost as if he understood the weight of our conversation. "Max, you know we can't just bring home every stray," my dad interjected, his tone firm but not unkind. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, a frown deepening the lines on his forehead. I could sense the conflict within him. He loved animals just as much as my mom did, but there was something heavier on his mind, a burden that seemed to pull him away from the moment. "Please, Dad, look at him," I pleaded, feeling the pup squirm in my arms. "He's so tiny and helpless." I held him out, and the little guy let out a tiny bark, as if echoing my words. My mother's gaze flickered between me and my dad, sensing the undercurrents in the room. "Maybe we could just keep him for a little while," she suggested, though I could tell she was already considering the implications. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," David replied, shaking his head as he glanced back at the papers scattered across the table. I knew his research was consuming him, and in moments like this, it felt like everything else faded into the background. "Just think about it," I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. "He might make a difference in our lives." Sarah glanced at the dog, then back to me, her eyes softening as she considered my words. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Hope, perhaps? My heart raced as I saw her resolve wavering. "All right, we'll take him in temporarily," she finally said, making my chest swell with pride. "But we need to make sure we can care for him properly." Relief washed over me, and I held the tiny dog closer, feeling the warmth radiate from his little body. I named him Peanut, a fitting title for his minuscule size. The name earned a chuckle from my mom, which felt like the first genuine laughter that day. As we settled into a new routine with Peanut, I watched my mom carefully examine him, her veterinarian instincts kicking in. She was in her element, her hands deftly checking him for any signs of illness. There was an undeniable magic in seeing her so focused and happy, even if shadows still loomed over her features. I couldn't shake the feeling that Peanut was not just any little dog, but a catalyst for change in our family. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, I noticed my dad becoming increasingly distant. The late nights in his makeshift lab, filled with research papers and formulas, only deepened the chasm between us. My mom often sighed softly, lost in thoughts about how to bridge the gap. I wished I could help them, but I was just a kid with my own concerns about school and friends. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the kitchen window, I found my grandmother Lucy sitting at the table, her fingers tracing the worn edges of an old photo album. She had always been a source of comfort, her wisdom and stories weaving through our lives like a soothing balm. I tiptoed up to her, Peanut nestled snugly in my arms. "Hey, Lucy," I said softly, curiosity bubbling within me. "What were you looking at?" She glanced up, her blue eyes sparkling like the ocean, and smiled. "Just memories, my dear. Sometimes it's good to remember where we come from." I set Peanut down on the table beside her and watched as he sniffed at the album curiously. "I think he's part of our family now," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "He's going to help us all come together." Lucy chuckled softly. "You might be right about that, Max. Sometimes the smallest creatures can teach us the biggest lessons." The way she spoke held a weight I didn't fully understand, but it resonated with me, echoing the feeling I had about Peanut. There was a mystery about him, a link to something greater than I could grasp. As I looked at my grandmother, I realized she had her own secrets, perhaps even more profound than the ones surrounding us. This tiny dog had already begun to unravel layers of our family, and I sensed that the journey was only just beginning. I had no idea how intertwined our fates would become, but the journey ahead promised to be both challenging and enlightening. The next few days unfolded like a whirlwind, each moment filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I decided to name the tiny dog Pip, inspired by his lively spirit despite his small stature. Every time I watched him scamper around the house, I couldn't help but smile. He had a way of making even the heaviest thoughts feel lighter, as if he could sense the tension that lingered around my parents. They were both preoccupied with their own struggles. My mother, Sarah, lost in her work at the veterinary clinic, and my father, David, often buried in research papers that seemed to grow in number each day. One evening, as I curled up on the living room floor with Pip, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. The subject was their work, but it quickly shifted to something deeper, something that had clearly been weighing on them for a while. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," David said, his voice tinged with frustration. "The funding for my project is dwindling, and if I don't find a breakthrough soon, it could all be over." "Don't say that," Sarah replied softly, but her tone was strained. "We can't afford to lose that part of our lives, David. We have Max to think about. He needs stability, especially now." I felt a pang of guilt for eavesdropping, but it was hard not to pay attention when the conversation was so raw. My presence seemed to anchor their worries, a reminder of what was truly at stake. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed how the discovery of Pip began to draw my family closer together. Lucy, my grandmother, often sat with me while I played with the little dog, sharing stories about her own childhood. I could see the light in her eyes as she spoke of simpler times, when family bonds were unbreakable and trust was a given. "You see, Max," she said one afternoon while Pip gnawed on a chew toy, "every creature has its purpose, even the smallest among us. They can teach us lessons we might otherwise miss." Her words resonated with me as I watched Pip's antics. He was a tiny whirlwind of joy, reminding me that even in the face of uncertainty, there was still beauty to be found. But with every laugh and smile, I sensed an undercurrent of tension. My parents were still grappling with the weight of their secrets, and Lucy's past looms like a shadow over our lives. I wondered if Pip was somehow a catalyst for the changes we needed. One day, I found myself wandering into my mother's clinic after school. The scent of antiseptic, mixed with the comforting aroma of pet shampoo, filled the air. I watched as Sarah examined a cat, her gentle hands working with the precision of someone who truly cared. When she finished, I approached her, holding Pip tightly in my arms. "Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what if Pip is more than just a pet? What if he can help you and Dad?" She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean, honey?" I hesitated but felt the words bubbling to the surface. He's tiny, but he's brave and full of energy. Maybe he could inspire you both somehow, help you find a solution to what you're facing. Sarah's expression softened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. That night, as I lay in bed with Pip curled up beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were on the brink of something significant. My mind raced with possibilities. What if Pip's DNA had unique properties that could lead to breakthroughs in medicine? I had heard snippets of my father's conversations about genetic research and how certain traits in animals could unlock secrets about human health. I felt an urge to help, to bridge the gap between my parents' struggles and the hope that Pip could represent. In the following days, I began conducting my own research. I borrowed my dad's old microscope and gathered materials from around the house, determined to discover more about Pip. I carefully collected his hair and even some of his droppings, thinking that maybe, just maybe, I could find something extraordinary. While my science skills were rudimentary at best, I felt like a young scientist on the cusp of discovery, driven by a mix of curiosity and determination. I shared my findings with Lucy during our afternoon chats. She listened intently, her eyes twinkling with pride. "You're thinking like a true innovator, Max," she encouraged. "Don't underestimate the power of observation. Sometimes, the smallest pieces of evidence lead to the biggest revelations." Her support fueled my enthusiasm, and I found myself spending more time in the lab and less time worrying about the burdens of adulthood that my parents carried. As I immersed myself in my research, I noticed subtle changes in my parents. Sarah was spending more time brainstorming at home, sketching out ideas and possibilities that involved animals like Pip. David, too, seemed revitalized, often stopping to ask me about my experiment. The atmosphere in our home began to shift, filled with laughter and the scent of fresh coffee as my parents collaborated late into the night. Pip, with his sprightly energy, had become the heart of our family, the common thread that wove us closer together. Yet, amidst this newfound unity, I could feel the tremors of a larger storm brewing. There were whispers of my mother's past, secrets I was still too young to fully comprehend. I could sense that whatever legacy Pip was tied to, it was only a piece of a much larger puzzle. Just as Lucy had suggested, the tiniest creatures could lead to the most profound discoveries. As I looked at Pip, I felt a surge of hope and determination, ready to uncover the truth that lay ahead, one paw at a time. If you enjoyed this story and want to keep following Max, Sarah, David, and Lucy on their journey of discovery, don't forget to subscribe for more captivating tales. As I knelt down to pet Pip, the tiny dog nestled comfortably in my lap. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was more than just a curious companion. The way he looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with trust, made me wonder what kind of journey we were about to embark on together. I could already sense that he had a story of his own, one waiting to unfold. My mind raced with possibilities, each thought more fantastical than the last. Maybe Pip wasn't just any dog. Perhaps he had a special purpose that connected him to my family in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Moments later, I heard my mother's voice calling from the kitchen. "Max, can you help me with something?" I reluctantly stood up, carefully cradling Pip in my arms, and made my way inside. The aroma of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air, a comforting reminder of happier times. Yet my heart felt heavy with the weight of secrets that I didn't fully understand. Sarah stood at the counter, focused on rolling out dough, her brow furrowed in concentration. I could tell that something was bothering her, and I wished I could ease that burden, but the words to do so felt trapped inside me. "Mom, look who I found," I exclaimed, holding Pip out for her to see. Her expression shifted from concentration to surprise, and for a brief moment, the tension in the room melted away. "Oh, Max, he's adorable," she said, kneeling down to inspect Pip more closely. I felt a sense of pride swell in my chest as she brushed her fingers through Pip's fur. "Where did you find him?" she asked, her voice softening. "Just at the park," I replied, trying to keep the excitement in my voice. He was all alone, and I couldn't just leave him there. Sarah's smile faded slightly as a shadow of concern crossed her face. I could see her mind racing, probably considering the responsibilities that came with taking care of a pet. "You know we can't keep him, right? I have so much on my plate already," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of love and weariness. I nodded, but deep down, I believed there was something destined about our meeting. As I returned to my room, Pip nestled beside me on the bed. I thought about my father, David. He was wrapped up in his research, diving deeper into a project that seemed to consume him lately. I could hear him mumbling something about genetic markers and medical breakthroughs, but the more he delved into his work, the more distant he became. I wanted to share Pip with him, to see if his curiosity could awaken a spark in Dad. Maybe this tiny dog could bridge the gap that had formed between us. The next day, while Sarah was at the clinic, I ventured into Dad's lab, Pip trotting alongside me. The room was filled with high-tech equipment, books stacked haphazardly, and a chalkboard filled with complex equations. I found David hunched over a microscope, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Hey, Dad," I called out, excitement bubbling in my voice. He looked up, his eyes momentarily lighting up, before being overshadowed by a wave of exhaustion. "What is it, Max?" he replied, trying to muster enthusiasm. "Look what I found! This is Pip," I said, lifting the little dog high in the air as if presenting a trophy. David's face softened, but I could see that he was still caught up in his thoughts. "He's cute, Max. What are you going to do with him?" he asked, his tone polite but distracted. I felt a pang of disappointment, wishing he would engage more. "Can't we keep him? I think he could help with your work," I suggested, my heart racing with hope. That made him chuckle softly. "You think a dog can help with scientific research?" he replied, an eyebrow raised in skepticism. "Well, maybe not directly, but he could inspire you. Sometimes it's the little things that lead to great ideas." I tried to convey the importance of Pip, sensing that my father needed to see the bigger picture. Just then, Lucy walked in, her presence instantly calming the tension in the room. "Hello, boys. What's this little fellow?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with delight as she bent down to meet Pip. Suddenly, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. Lucy had a way of making everything seem magical, and I knew she would understand. "He's going to be part of our family," I declared, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Lucy smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the smallest creatures can bring the largest changes, Max. You may not realize it yet, but he's here for a reason." Her words hung in the air, filling the space with a sense of possibility. David looked between us, his brow furrowed, as if he were grappling with the concept of Pip's significance. That evening, as we all sat around the dinner table, Pip curled up at my feet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. The conversation flowed, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension between my parents. Sarah's eyes darted toward David every so often, a silent dialogue full of unspoken worries. I wished I could mend whatever fracture lay between them, but I was still just a boy trying to make sense of a world that felt increasingly complex. "Max, have you thought about what you'll name him?" Sarah asked. I shrugged, unsure of what to say. "Pip feels right, I think," I said, looking down at the tiny creature who had unknowingly become the center of my universe. The moment felt heavy with meaning, as if Pip had not only entered my life, but had woven himself into the very fabric of our family. I could feel it in my bones. This was just the beginning of something extraordinary. As I held Pip close, the warmth of his tiny body grounding me, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a pet. He was a living puzzle piece connecting me to a bigger picture I couldn't quite see yet. I hurried back inside, heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. My parents were in the kitchen, their voices low and serious. I could hear snippets of their conversation, something about research grants and deadlines, but my attention was solely on Pip. "Mom, Dad," I called out as I entered, clutching the little dog tightly against my chest. Their discussion halted, and both turned to me with curious expressions. "Look what I found." I carefully revealed Pip, who peered out at them with wide, innocent eyes, as if seeking approval. My mother's eyes softened immediately. "Oh my goodness, Max, where did you find him?" She knelt down to get a better look, her veterinarian instincts kicking in as she inspected the dog's tiny frame. David followed suit, moving closer to see what I had rescued from the park. "I found him all alone. He needs a home," I explained, my voice filled with urgency. Pip squirmed in my grip, eager to explore this new environment, and I set him gently on the floor. The small dog wobbled slightly before righting himself, his little tail wagging furiously as he took in the sights and smells of our house. Sarah's eyes sparkled with concern. "Max, he's so tiny. Are you sure he's okay? We should check him for any health issues." "Can we keep him, please?" I pleaded, my heart racing at the possibility of having a dog. I looked between my parents, gauging their reactions. David ran a hand through his hair, glancing at Sarah. "We have to think this through, Max. It's a big responsibility." "But he needs us," I countered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "He's all alone, just like I felt when you were both busy." The moment hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. Sarah sighed, her gaze shifting toward David. "We can't just ignore him. Animals depend on us." I watched as she wrestled with her emotions. It was evident that she had her own struggles, and I felt a flicker of understanding. Maybe we were all a little lost, searching for something to hold on to. After a brief silence, David finally nodded. "Okay, let's take him to the vet tomorrow for a full checkup. If he's healthy, then we can discuss keeping him." My heart soared at his words, a mix of hope and relief washing over me. Pip scampered over to my feet, his tiny paws pattering against the hardwood as if he knew he was on the brink of a new adventure. Later that night, as I lay in bed, Pip curled up beside me, I found it hard to sleep. The world outside was quiet, the only sounds coming from the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant bark of a dog. In that stillness, my mind wandered back to my mother's reluctance to embrace the idea of keeping Pip. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her hesitation. Perhaps it was the weight of our family's secrets pressing down on her, just as it pressed down on me. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and my excitement was palpable. I carefully placed Pip in a small basket with a soft blanket and rushed down for breakfast. My parents were already at the table, their faces etched with a familiar seriousness. As I joined them, I couldn't help but notice the tension still lingering in the air. "Max, you're excited about today, aren't you?" Sarah asked, her voice softening a little. I nodded vigorously, practically bouncing in my seat. "Pip is going to be okay, I just know it." David smiled slightly, a hint of pride flashing in his eyes. "We'll see him through this, buddy. But remember, if he has any health issues, we'll have to make some tough choices." I felt a pang in my chest at his words. Choices. The last time I had to make a tough choice, I had hesitated, unsure of which path to take. This time, with Pip, I wanted to be brave. I wanted to be the hero of the story. The ride to the clinic was filled with nervous energy. Pip seemed to sense my anxiety. He sniffed around the basket, his tiny nose twitching with curiosity. Sarah kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, trying to gauge my mood. I caught her eye, and a sudden urge to comfort her surged within me. Maybe we were both battling our fears in our own ways. When we arrived, the clinic was bustling with activity. Other animals were being checked in, and I could see a cat meowing in distress. My heart raced as we entered, and I held Pip tighter. Would they treat him well? Would they understand how special he was to me? A kind nurse approached us, kneeling to greet Pip. "What a sweet little guy. What's his name?" she asked, her smile infectious. "Pip," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but the joy of saying his name lit up my face. The nurse's eyes widened in delight. "Let's get him checked out, shall we?" As we moved through the process, I found myself caught up in the atmosphere of hope mixed with worry. Every bark and meow echoed my own uncertainties, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Pip was special. It wasn't just his size. There was an energy about him, a spark that felt linked to something bigger than any of us. While we waited for the vet, I glanced around the clinic, my heart racing with anticipation. I wondered about my family and their secrets, about the legacy that had woven itself into our lives. Perhaps Pip was more than just a pet. Maybe he was the thread we needed to stitch our family back together, to heal the fractures we had been grappling with for far too long. When the vet finally called us in, I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever lay ahead. I was determined to protect Pip and prove to my parents that together we could navigate any storm. Little did I know, this journey was only just beginning, and the revelations that awaited us would change everything. As I walked into the examination room, Pip nestled securely in my arms, a flutter of anxiety twisted in my stomach. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the faint sound of distant barking. I felt my mother's presence beside me, her hand gently resting on my shoulder, a silent reminder of our solidarity. I glanced up at her and saw the worry etched on her face. Sarah had always been strong, her resolve unwavering even in the toughest of times, yet today was different. The weight of our family's secrets loomed larger than usual, and I knew she was grappling with more than just Pip's health. The vet, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, entered the room, offering a warm smile that momentarily eased my tension. Her presence, though reassuring, reminded me of the enormity of the situation we were facing. Pip squirmed in my arms, sensing my unease, and I held him closer, my heart racing as the vet approached. "What can I do for you today?" she asked, her tone friendly yet professional. I swallowed hard and began to explain how I found Pip abandoned at the park, how he seemed frail and frightened. As I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that Pip was more than just a lost pup. There was something unique about him, something that whispered of secrets buried deep within our family. My mind drifted to my grandmother, Lucy, and the stories she often shared about her past. I had always thought of them as mere fairy tales, but now they felt intertwined with the tiny creature before me. What if Pip was the key to unlocking those hidden truths? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. And I focused on the vet's words as she examined Pip, her hands deftly working over his small frame. After a thorough check, the vet turned to us, her expression serious. "He appears to be in good shape overall, but I want to run some tests to determine if there are any underlying issues. He might be small, but we have to be diligent." My heart sank a little at her words. I felt the familiar swell of anxiety creeping back in. I wanted to believe that everything would be okay, that Pip was destined to be a part of our family, but there was no guarantee. As the vet took Pip from my arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into uncharted territory. While we waited for the test results, I glanced at my mother. Her expression was distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. I wanted to reach out, to ask her what was weighing on her mind, but I hesitated. I had no idea how much she was dealing with, and I didn't want to push her further into her own turmoil. Instead, I decided to distract myself by thinking about David and his work. He had been coming home late, immersed in research that seemed to consume him. Perhaps Pip's arrival could serve as a bridge between us all, a chance to unify our fragmented family amidst the chaos of our lives. As the minutes dragged on, my thoughts wandered to Lucy and the stories she had shared about her youth. She always spoke of the bond between pets and humans as a lifeline, a connection that transcended time and space. I had never fully understood what she meant until now. Pip felt like an extension of me, something I had been missing all my life. He brought a sense of purpose to my days, a reason to smile amid the heaviness of family secrets and unspoken fears. Finally, the vet returned, her face a mix of concern and curiosity. "Max, we need to talk about something important," she began, her gaze flickering to Pip and then back to me. My heart raced as I prepared for the worst. She continued, "We ran some tests on Pip's DNA, and the results are fascinating. I think you might want to sit down for this." My knees felt weak, and I instinctively gripped Pip tighter as I braced myself for whatever news she was about to deliver. "Max, it turns out that Pip's genetic makeup is quite unique. He's not just an ordinary dog. His DNA holds potential that could revolutionize veterinary medicine. It might seem far-fetched, but he may possess traits that could aid in developing treatments for specific ailments." My mind reeled as her words sank in. Could it be true? Was this tiny creature really a part of something much larger than I had ever imagined? The implications were staggering, and I felt a mix of excitement and fear bubbling within me. I looked at my mother, whose eyes widened in disbelief. This news changed everything. Suddenly, Pip wasn't just a lost dog. He was a vital piece of a puzzle that connected us to the world beyond our small family. I wanted to shout, to celebrate. But I could also sense the underlying tension. What would this mean for my father, and how would it affect his already strained relationship with his work? I knew he'd be excited about the scientific possibilities, but I also worried about how it would all unfold. As we left the vet's office, I held Pip close, feeling the warmth of his small body against my chest. It was as if he understood the weight of the moment, the significance of what lay ahead for us as a family. My mind swirled with questions and possibilities. Would this discovery bring us closer together or drive us further apart? I couldn't help but wish for the latter. I had longed for our family to unite, to heal, and to embrace this unexpected journey together. As we stepped outside into the brisk air, I turned to my mother, ready to ask her what she thought about the news. But before I could speak, she looked at me with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Max," she said softly, "this could be the beginning of something wonderful for us. We need to be open to whatever comes next." Her words ignited a flicker of optimism within me. Maybe, just maybe, Pip had arrived at the perfect time, challenging us to confront our past and embrace the future. If you've ever experienced a moment when a small being changed everything for you, I would love to hear your story. Please share your experiences, and let's celebrate the profound connections that shape our lives. As I sat on the worn wooden floor of my room, Pip curled up in my lap, I could feel the warmth of his tiny body against my legs. His presence was comforting, a small spark of joy amidst the swirling uncertainties of my family's life. I remembered my mother's voice, her quiet resolve as she spoke about the past and the shadows that loomed over us. I thought about Sarah, her gentle hands tending to the wounds of animals while her own heart bore invisible scars. She had always been there for others. Yet I sensed she was wrestling with her own demons, secrets that seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. "Max," I could hear her call me, and I would often catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, as if the outside world held answers she couldn't grasp. It was during one of those moments, with Pip nestled against me, that I decided to dig deeper into the tangled web of my family's history. What were the stories Lucy had kept hidden? What had driven David to focus so intensely on his work, sometimes at the expense of being present for us? I felt a surge of determination. I needed to understand them better, and perhaps in doing so, I would also understand myself. The following day, as the sun peeked through the curtains, I approached Sarah while she was preparing breakfast. The smell of sizzling bacon filled the air, but I was more interested in the conversation. "Mom, can we talk about Grandma Lucy?" I asked, my heart racing. She looked at me, surprise flickering in her eyes, and I could tell I had caught her off guard. "What do you want to know?" she replied cautiously, placing a plate on the table. I hesitated, the weight of my question pressing on my chest. "I feel like there's something she isn't telling us. I want to know more about her past." Sarah sighed, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over her face. "Lucy has her reasons for keeping things to herself, Max. Some things are better left unspoken." "But what if knowing those things can help us?" I pressed, feeling a surge of conviction. What if we can understand her better and, in turn, understand each other? The silence that followed was thick, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. Eventually, she relented. All right, but it's not easy. There are parts of her story that are painful. With Pip by my side, we settled in the living room. Sarah began to recount the tales of Lucy's youth, her adventures, her struggles, and the wisdom she carried from her experiences. I listened intently, captivated by the tales of resilience and strength. Sarah spoke of how Lucy had faced adversity alone and how she had fought for what she believed in. I could feel the connection forming, the invisible threads binding our family together through our shared history. Meanwhile, David was absorbed in his research, laboring in his makeshift lab at home. I often watched him from a distance, his focus unwavering as he pored over notes and samples. I knew that his work was important, a groundbreaking venture that could change lives, yet I couldn't help but notice how it pulled him away from us. The spark of excitement in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a weariness that seemed to seep into his very bones. I wanted to bridge that gap, to bring him back to the family he seemed to be drifting from. One afternoon, while I played with Pip outside, I noticed David pacing in the backyard, deep in thought. I gathered my courage and called out to him, "Dad, can we talk?" He turned, surprised by the invitation. "Sure, Max, what's on your mind?" I motioned for him to join me on the grass, where Pip was happily chasing after fallen leaves. "I've been thinking about how much we've been missing each other lately. It feels like you're always working." His expression shifted, a flicker of guilt washing over his features. "I know, son. I've just been so focused on my research. It's critical work, and I believe it can help people." I nodded, understanding his dedication, but also feeling the weight of his absence. "I get that, but family is important too. Pip has shown me that sometimes the smallest things can make the biggest difference. Can't we find a balance?" David paused, the gears in his mind visibly turning as he watched Pip bounding about. "You're right, Max. I need to remember that while my work is significant, it's not worth losing moments with you and your mother." The sincerity in his voice was palpable, and I felt a rush of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of him reconnecting with us. As the days turned into weeks, our family began to intertwine more deeply. Sarah and I continued to explore Lucy's past together, sharing moments of laughter and tears over stories that shaped her into the strong woman she was. David gradually found ways to include us in his research, explaining his findings during family dinners, turning our home into a hub of discovery. Pip, in his tiny, unassuming way, had managed to unite us, weaving our lives together like the finest tapestry. One evening, as we gathered in the living room, Lucy joined us. The fire crackled, and Pip lay curled up at my feet. "What's this I hear about my stories being told?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Just the parts that made you extraordinary, Grandma," I replied, a smile spreading across my face. The air was filled with warmth, a sense of belonging enveloping us, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were whole again. That night, as I lay in bed with Pip nestled beside me, I reflected on how far we had come. The smallest dog had sparked a change that I never anticipated. Our family had begun to heal, discovering the strength in vulnerability and the power of acceptance. Together, we were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united by love and understanding, a bond that, much like Pip, had proven to be both small and mighty.